Okay, here we are. All right, getting the last couple people in. All right, so here we are. We last week we talked about the structure of the Seder, and we talked a bit about how different parts of the Seder, a bit different parts of the Haggadah, the text that we use for the Seder, are are collected and put together over a series of many years. Things are written first in the period of the Mishnah and the Talmud, and then the first time we get anything resembling the text of Haggadah is in the Gaonic period. So that's maybe, approaching the year 1000, maybe 100, years before that. And then we start to get a more solidified text of this Haggadah. The Haggadah um, has a number of elements to it, which we looked at last week, one of which is that you have, and I'm really just summarizing what we did last week. One of them is that it needs to be in a question and answer form, and we're going to do a lot more on that question and answer form this week and show you something somewhat remarkable about that question and answer form. The second thing that we said is that there are different answers. That there are some who say that the answer to the question, the four questions, so to speak, is we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That's a pure sort of political answer. It seems to be a very logical answer. It seems to be a very straightforward answer, but it is certainly not the only answer. And one of the other answers is our forefathers were idol worshippers. Ovdei avodah zarah hayu avotenu b'Mitzrayim. And so that says, you know what, you guys, you may have come into this thinking that you were at a something that was dealing with history. Maybe you thought you were something dealing with politics. Maybe you thought it was something about personal freedom and liberation. But really, if you dig down on the story is really about much more. The story is going to be about a spiritual awakening, which means that we need to start with the idea that we didn't know about God, and then that's the beginning of the story. The end of the story, we do know about God. We come to discover God in full glory, wonders, miracles, splitting seas, turning water into blood, etc., etc. So that is a second sort of arc of the narrative. Um, there is also a general instruction. I don't think I discussed this last week, but one of the general instructions is matchil begenut u'mesayim b'shevach, that you begin with the challenging parts of the story and you end with um, the celebration, the praise. What I want to share with you this week, however, just a little bit more detail. The way in which the Haggadah was originally composed is that the rabbis of the Mishnah said, Doresh me'ara mi'aved ovi ad sheyigmor kol haparsha kula. So, here we go. You start with my father was a wandering Aramean until you finish the entire parsha. So here it says, Tseu lamad ma bikesh Lavan Arami lasot leYaakov Avinu. Go and learn. This is what Laban the Aramean sought to do our forefather Jacob. And so that's where this all starts. It starts with these words here, Arami Oved Avi, which means an Aramean sought my father's death. This just want to show you the um, want to show you this text from because it comes from the book of Devarim of Deuteronomy. And here we go. See if I can get the right chapter on the first try, but um, no, I am need to go maybe just a couple chapters forward. Uh, okay, here we go. This text actually comes from a place that you would never guess. It does not come from the book of Exodus. It does not come from the central narratives of the story of Exodus, but it comes from a slightly different place. And what place is that? It is what's called the Vidui Bikurim, the confession of the first fruits. So a farmer takes his first fruits, let's just say wheat, it could be wheat, grapes, puts them in a basket, and he presents them to the Kohen. And the Kohen shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the Eternal, in front of God. And then it says, you shall then recite the following before the Eternal. And here's exactly where this comes. So I can maybe just touch more context. This is really a celebration of the gift of land. It is a meditation on the fact that when you are wandering, you are extremely vulnerable. That that the state of being non-citizens, of being non-protected, of being non-sovereign was extremely perilous. And so it starts with the story of Arami Oved Avi. My father was a fugitive Aramean. The truth of the matter is, this is a difficult. Um, these three words are not simple to translate. These three words either mean my father was a a fugitive Aramean, as translated here, but it could also mean an Aramean tried to destroy my father. That's the way it's translated in the Haggadah. So you'll notice that in this translation, this particular, this is the JPS translation. They're going to translate it one way. The um, the um, the Haggadah is going to translate it a different way. The truth of the matter is, this is the genius of the Hebrew. The Hebrew sort of has both meanings sort of in there. And who is the father? Well, one could be Jacob. That's the one that's understood by the Haggadah, because Laban, the Aramean, tried to destroy our father Jacob. But who's the fugitive Aramean? The fugitive Aramean is Abraham, because he runs away from Mesopotamia, where he's a fugitive, right? So both of those are connected, and fine, both of them work, because if you don't have a land, right, people are going to oppress you, and you're going to become a fugitive. So it sort of perfectly describes the scenario of the Jewish people. And we went down to Egypt. We literally went to the lion's den for protection. And the this particular section is just going to, again, it's going to tell us that the story of Egypt in a very short burst. So I'm just going to read it for you. I'm going to read it in English, even though I'm very tempted to read it in Hebrew. But you'll see that it has a certain familiarity. Okay, he went out to Egypt, meager in numbers, sojourned there, but he became great and very populous nation. And the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us, and they imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried out to the Eternal, the God of our ancestors, and the Eternal heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. God freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and awesome power, by signs and by, I'm going to use the word wonders instead of portents. Okay, bringing us to this place, giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. This last line does not appear in your Haggadah. Okay, that God brought us a land of milk and honey. Well, that's a whole other question. But now, this is where we are. You'll see that what's happening here in this section is that we are quoting that which appears in all caps in this particular presentation. The all caps sections are the quotes of the verses. Right? And he sought my father's death, and he went down to Egypt, and he resided there, just a handful of souls, and there became a great nation, large, mighty, and great. And he went down to Egypt, compelled by what had been spoken. So, um, it says, that's a very literal translation. It's a translation of these words. Anus al pi hadibor. Anus al pi hadibor, it means it was a divine promise that was going to happen here. This refers back most likely to the covenant of the parts. That is a covenant between God and Abraham in, I think, maybe Genesis 15, somewhere thereabouts, is the covenant of the parts. And here, Abraham says, by what merit will my children deserve to get this land of Israel? And the answer there is, well, they're going to become slaves in Egypt. They too will earn their stripes through a very trying moment, and their character will be developed through that. Um, but maybe I just want to take one step back and talk a little bit about genre. These texts come from there were at the time of the writing of the Talmud, there were two different ways of presenting material. One was sort of subject oriented. So let's just say we were on the subject of blessings. So the subject of blessings is treated in the tractate of Brachot in the Mishnah, and so all those things have to do with blessings. But there's another way that they would do this is they would take out the Torah. Probably these texts were composed so that people would have what to say on Shabbat, and on at that time they would come out and they would say um, that okay, this week we're reading. In this case, it would be Parshat Ki Tavo, and we're going to talk about all the different things that all the different rabbinic interpretations. And so the in this texts, the as I mentioned, the caps, the all caps, that refers to the actual text of the Torah, the written law. What is then in between in the ordinary text, that is going to be the rabbinic interpretation. And so this rabbinic interpretation is this happens to be one which from it's called the Medrash Tanaim, and they simply take that text and they put it into the Haggadah. And so each one of these um, um, is going to be a rabbinic interpretation on one of these lines. Um, so we see, and he resided there. From this, we learn that our father Jacob went down not to be absorbed into Egypt, but to reside there for a time. Right? He didn't want to become assimilated into Egypt. That wasn't the mission, but it was just a temporary sojourn. And um, each one of these is another sort of interpretation. Um, um, just want to just want to see if I can find one that makes just sense. Uh, okay, so very often part of what they're doing is they are sort of showing you what are the references to other parts of the biblical text. And the Egyptians dealt cruelly with us and oppressed us and imposed hard labor on us. What does it mean they dealt cruelly with us? So it means um, that the Egyptians decided that even though the Jews had done nothing wrong, they were a fifth column and they could join their enemies. And so in order to do that, they subjugated them to hard labor because of this external fear that had no evidence whatsoever that the Jews were going to be a fifth column, a subversive force. Okay, so that's just sort of how that all goes. Great. Now, here's where I want to show you something a little bit novel. Um, hold on, let me just properly do this. Um, okay. Okay. Here we go. I'm almost ready. One of these days I'll be really technologically savvy. Okay. All right. So this comes from the Haggadah of Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon. Rabbi Rimon makes the following very interesting observation. He says that the Haggadah is going to have four sets. Four is a very common number in the Haggadah. 4 cups of wine, 4 languages of redemption, 4 sons. Oh, we're going to get a lot of fours. 4 questions, a lot of fours. So there are, but not only are there 4 questions, which are in the Manishtana, and those are the ones, why is this night different than all other nights? Eating matzah versus chametz versus leavened products, eating um, bitter herbs instead of other vegetables, and why do we eat reclining? So those are the 4 questions. But Rabbi Rimon is going to say, wait a minute. The Haggadah actually goes with, there are four sort of structures of question. It goes question, the opening question, telling of a story, um, and praise. So it's going to end with praise. It's going to have these two elements. It's going to have question and answer, and it's going to start with bad and end with good. So each one has its own sort of paragraph of celebration at the end. There is also, each one has a theme in terms of its kind of redemption that it's going to deal with. I apologize that I only have this for you in Hebrew, um, but you can hopefully take good notes to be able to follow this. All right. So we start with first scenario we have is Manishtana. I'm going to use my little drawing. The first questions we eat after we break the matzah is Manishtana. So that is the question. Okay, why is this night different than all other nights? And then we come immediately with a very, very good and simple answer. And that answer is Abadim Hayinu Lefar b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. There's a whole paragraph on being slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, so that is in very quick succession. We are going to have question and answer. Okay, and where does there's a paragraph of praise that comes to at the end of that, which is interesting because I'm going to flip my share for a moment so you can see where this is in the Haggadah. Why is this not? Me too. Hold on. All right, I'm gonna stop. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So as I said, the question is going to start right here with the Manishtana Halaylaza. That's our question, right? And so we get these four questions. Great. Then we're gonna come to the next thing, which is the answer. And the answer is right here. Abadim hayinu lefar Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, right, etc. Okay, good. Now we've got that. No, I haven't surprised anybody so far, right? Everything is just exactly what we expected it to be. Here's where things get interesting. You have these two stories about Seders. They may be even a little bit of a distraction. Let's leave that on the side for a moment. But the section concludes with praise, right? Now, I'm going to say this is wrong, the way the editors of this Haggadah put it. This is not the section where you write Magid, the four sons, because this doesn't say, right? It's really the close of the other section, right? So I'm going to say it's right here that the Torah we want to say is four sons. Right there, right? Now, again, I'll do it I'll show you where it is in the English. In the English, this is our closing section, which is praise. And right here, this is where you want to say you have the four sons, right? We could go four children, but that's where it is. This section above, this is the praise, right, of God. And what's the focus of that section? The focus of that section, says Rabbi Rimon, is physical redemption. That's what that really seems to be talking about. It's a section about physical redemption. Why do we say it's physical redemption? I would say because it's focusing on the fact that we're slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay? So I think that's what gives it physical redemption. Now, the next section, I'm going to put it in a different color because the next section is really about, it gives us our next question. The next questions are here, right? The way we read this is we read it as a story about four sons. What Rabbi Rimon is saying is baked into the story of the four sons is itself a question, right? What are all these things that God commanded you? And by the way, that's the best question of the night, because that's another version of saying what's the most famous question of every Seder? Somebody say it out loud.
When do we get to eat?
Exactly. This is another way of saying when do we get to eat? What are all these things we have to do before we eat? Why can't we just eat? Right? So, and the answer is after eating the Pesach offering, one does not eat anything more, right? So these are laws of eating. And and we have four sons, and three of the four obviously have questions, right? Because one is famously known as the one who does not know how to ask the question. So here we go through the four questions, right? And here we come to um, the the answer, and the answer is right here. The answer is in the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers, right? So Rabbi Rimon says this is the second answer, right? This is in the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers, but now we have come to worship Hashem. Okay, so that is question answer number one. Um, Now what I'm going to do is if I'm see if I can. Okay, so here Rabbi Rimon showed us that we've got the Chacham, the four sons. That's our question. Our forefathers were idol worshippers. That's our answers. Now we have the praise section, right? Baruch Shomer Tachato. Blessed is the one who keeps his um his promise, right? I'm just gonna adjust the screen a little bit so you can see this. Okay. Okay. So here, this is right up here is the section of this is the Q. I'm sorry, this is the answer, right? Because the four sons were our question. This is the answer right here. In the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers, but now we're not. That's the answer. And now we saw the answers, and now we're going to go down to um, the praise. The praise is blessed is the one who has kept his promise to Israel. Blessed is he, for the Holy One, blessed be he, calculated an end and fulfilled what he had spoken to our father Abraham in the covenant of the pieces, right? So this is the conclusion, the praise conclusion of section number two, right? So this is end Q&A 2. Sorry for the bad whiteboard abilities here. Okay, now again, Rav Rimon's going to say, what is the overarching theme of this? The overarching theme of this is going to be um, the theme of spiritual redemption, right? It starts from idol worship and goes to a system of belief, right? This is spiritual redemption. Now, there is a third section of all of this. What is our third section? Well, let's go back to our chart and see the third section. The third section is the section that we sort of opened with today, right? I told you that we're told that you have to do you have to do a drasha. You start from my father was a wandering Aramean, and you go to the section which says um, um, until you finish that entire parsha. And so, where is that? That is this that whole long section of rabbinic interpretations. So the I'm going to again just reviewing here quickly So it starts with Laban the Aram. Oh, I should get my annotator on. Okay, it starts with Laban the Aramean. Then we go through all of the answer is all of that question and answer in that detailed rabbinic text. And then the conclusion, the song, which is the end of that section of question and answer, the praise is the famous Dayenu. When it says Kama Malot Tovot Lamakam Aleinu, that is the first words of Dayenu. Nobody remembers that because that's not the part you really sing, but that's Dayenu. And so what he says, this is the redemption. This is redemption of Torah study as itself. This is sort of a way of saying that Torah study is its own kind of redemption. Okay? Um, um, so just gonna switch us back to um, the other view, just so we can see the actual Haggadah. Um,
Meaning that that through Torah study we are redeemed, or that we're blessed to be able to have Torah study.
no, I think the way to look at this is that this section is how do you um, how do you understand the way in which this story is told, right? What is the way of telling the story of Pesach? And in this case, the way of telling the story of Pesach is through specific rabbinic interpretation, right? So the answers, the question, the way in which the story is told is through micro question and answer by analyzing every little word in the text, right? That's its sort of modus operandi. And you'll see that, right? I want you to really appreciate. Let me see if I can do this properly. Um, um, Here we go. Okay. So these are all the rabbinic questions, right? So boom, you got right there, you've got a set of rabbinic questions, right? And then we're coming down here, we're gonna have a whole new set of questions, right? You got new, large and mighty and great. What do each one of these mean, right? And so again, you're going question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. The question in each one of these is implicit. Why does it say and great? Oh, well, the reason it says is great is I will grow you wild like meadow plants, and you will be matured and come forth in your glory, right? And then it's going to quote from the book of Isaiah, right? And this is always the one that raises questions. You were naked and exposed. Some right. What does it mean you were naked and your breast full and your hair grown? You were naked and exposed. Meaning the way the rabbis interpret that, just so you know, is you didn't have mitzvot. And there's a whole interpretation that talks about through the blood you live, through the blood you live. Well, which bloods is it? Well, it's the blood of Brit Milah, and it's the blood of the doorpost. So everything has its own kind of explanation. So Rav Rimon is saying this story has a way of being told, and that way of being told in this particular case is through drashot and verses, right? Okay, so we've done three of the four. Okay, let's go to gonna try and get to four. Okay, the fourth. What is the fourth? The fourth is the section of Rabban Gamliel. When Rabban Gamliel says this matzah which we're eating, for what purpose is it? And Rabban Gamliel says Pesach, matzah, and maror. He says the three things are Pesach, matzah, and maror. So here he says matzah. Remember that the way in which this is presented in the Haggadah is it's presented as a question. Matzazu sha'anu achulim ashuma. This matzah which we're eating is for what? It could very easily be said, it would be a shorter Haggadah. It said, the matzah represents, and the maror represents this, and the Pesach offering represents that. It's not how it goes. It says, why do we eat this matzah? Right? And then from Gamliel's three things, we have to explain Pesach, matzah, and maror. And this brings us to the final sort of act of of praise. That final act of praise is the Hallel. We're going to say the first two paragraphs of Hallel. And this is the same Hallel we say on every holiday, every other time, but we're just going to, this is going to say the first two paragraphs of Hallel. After that, we drink the second cup of wine. After that, we're eating matzah. Okay? Um, and here, the way in which this story is being told is through, I think, the word here he uses is hamchasha. So I believe hamchasha means to make something material or tactile. Um, so I'm just going to check my interpretation here, but I'm almost sure.
It's to make it
Uh,
physical.
right,
Muhashi.
to illustrate, to illustrate.
Muhashi, yeah.
Yeah, it's to illustrate. So the point is that the story is being illustrated through props, right? This is the telling of the story through props. So this is a different telling of the story. We are now telling the story through the objects of mitzvah of the Seder, right? So again, we have question, we have answer, and we have praise. It's a very interesting, and it's very hard to argue with his setup here. He is he is clearly laying out a way in which the Haggadah presents us with a very clear structure that repeats four times. And the value of this structure is actually it's quite good. Because first of all, if you really ask the questions, then there's always a natural interest if you have questions. The idea that you have four different answers, I think, is actually very important. I think we we miss this. We think that one question is one answer, and that this really talks about a multivalent redemption. There are many different parts of that redemption, right? You could say one part of that redemption, if you're looking at this chart now, um, sorry, get rid of the drawings. If you're looking at this chart, if you're looking at this chart now, the first one is this the story of we were slaves in Pharaoh in Egypt. The second one is about spiritual movement. The third one is about the mitzvot themselves and the way in which the Torah is describes it. What's so brilliant about this is that none of these are mutually exclusive, right? You do have to have there is a political redemption which is absolutely critical, but the political redemption does not always include a spiritual discovery. And the spiritual discovery doesn't always continue to have the consensus method of celebration. Here's a good example of this is post October 7th. How are we remembering October 7th? We all know how we're gonna remember the Exodus from Egypt. We all know how we're gonna remember the tragedies of Tisha B'av. But new things they don't have one structure to them, and so everybody does their own thing, and then maybe it will solidify, maybe it won't solidify. But these things, you need to have consensus. Unless everybody's reading the same Megillah, unless everybody's eating the same matzah, it's not going to be have the force of a Jewish custom, and the universality adds a lot to it. And so here, when we start to get the drashot, psukim, etc., we're going to see that we have, well, actually, maybe I'm already jumping ahead to the Pesach Matzah and Mar, the ritual that comes there, right? That we need to have certain things which become our symbols. That too is a way of redemption, that we've created a language that we can all share. Then there's also the idea that we have a text that we know how to interpret, that we agree upon and we use. That's another sort of level of redemption. But what his structure tells you is, you think this is a long text? Not a long text. It just has its four layers of discovering redemption. That's the and it's very hard. Again, I think it's very hard to argue with this. I think he's absolutely correct that the Haggadah does four questions, four answers, four sets of praises, and that each one has their own sort of signature kind of approach to it. Okay, so with that, that sort of, I guess, the last thing I have to say about Seder structure, aside from the fact that maybe the last thing that we're going to need to deal with is is the, you know, after you after you tell the story, then you have to eat. And eating is its own sort of way of us creating a certain kind of concrete, I want to say almost glue. It's a bonding aspect. It bonds us to the story. It binds us to each other. It's very important. I think it's interesting. Rarely does one person down all three matzahs in front of them, right? There's a lot of food passing that happens at a Seder, which I think is not an accidental thing. Um, and um, the um, the then I guess we have to appreciate all those aspects of the meal. And the hardest part, I think, of the Seder, the great challenge, especially out here in the wild, wild West, which is Seder start very late, especially Pacific Northwest. You're going to start with, I don't know, but this year you start at 8:30. I think you're lucky if you get to Motzi Matzah by 9:30, 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, you're eating your meal. 11 o'clock, you are 2 cups of wine in. By the time you finish benching, you are 3 cups of wine in, and then you've got to do Hallel. Now, the Hallel section is meant to be the sort of this real. That's the spiritual moment. You're like, it's the moment where you were in the clutches of danger. You were in the I want to say the jaws of defeat. You were sitting there in the jaws of defeat. And now you get to sort of celebrate and you get to enjoy the rescue. And so the Hallel is a way of saying, it's the songs of celebration after you feel that relief of the rescue. And it's interesting because the section of Hallel after the meal is a section of Hallel which discusses, it transitions from that redemption on of God intervening in the world to a sort of recognition of sort of God in nature, right? And when you read the Nishmat Kol Chai, for example, you get a sense that we can't even describe the number of miracles that God bestows upon us through all the different bounty of nature, etc. So it sort of, you could make the argument that last part of Hallel is really the true spiritual transition because it takes you from the story of things and the politics of things, and it brings you into this moment where you are you are saying, "Oh wow, I see the hand of God in the world," and once you see it somewhere, you see it everywhere, and that's the outcome of that. Okay, so that's what I have prepared for today. I don't know if anyone has questions, comments, short speeches, thoughts, something or other. But okay,
I
Annie,
think it's,
nothing.
oh, go ahead.
I do not have
Debbie,
questions.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say, I think it sets up the Seder beautifully, to keep everybody sort of interested. This is a fantastic structure, rather than just thinking it's all one lump kind of thing. Of course, there's favorite parts to the Seder, but I think this really presents something really special. I'm really excited.
Well, good.
Excellent.
I'm glad. I'm going to tell you, with people these days, you need a few more tricks up your sleeve. Um,
Yeah, the
there's a
marshmallows
couple
work
things.
good.
Throwing marshmallows to people who answer the questions, always a big hit. Um,
Okay.
um, and I I try and dress up in different ways. And there's, you need to pull tricks out. You need to make it contemporary. You need to be able to make it a good story. So, all right. I
Oh, yeah.
I
with
got four
that,
siblings, so I think each one will take one redemption.
there you go. You also have two sons.
True. Hmm. Okay, thank you. You're giving me more
Okay.
work.
All right. All right, we're back on at 7:30. So back on
Okay.
at 7:30, with something related to the Seder, but this one's going to be this one's wild and woolly. If you want some entertainment, this is definitely going to be some entertainment. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Take care.